Hi everyone, my name is Karis and welcome back to my little corner of the internet where I talk about books and other things that I enjoy. So today I'm going to be wrapping up the books I read in September and talking a little bit about the books that I'm currently reading, or the ones that I sort of feel like I want to read in October. I'm not saying that this is a TBR because I think I've learnt that I am just terrible at setting TBRs. Did anyone else's September last about 2 seconds? I was lucky enough to spend a week of September in Cornwall, and the past week I have been ill, which is great. Not corona. I haven't got any of the symptoms of corona. I'm not sure if I've had a real mild stomach bug flu type situation, or if it's just a physical manifestation of anxiety. I'm not sure at this point, but I do feel a lot better today compared to how I have done the past week, which is why I'm finally sitting down today and filming this wrap up a bit later than I had planned. So because September felt so quick for me and seemed to just fly by, I actually managed to only get around to reading 3 books, which is not as many as I'd hoped to read, but I did read 3 books that I really enjoyed, so I'm happy about that. I would rather have 3 books that I'm really pleased to have read than like 20 books that I didn't like as much. So if you saw my video for last month, you know that I themed my September TBR around the Bratz Readathon, and I sort of very low-key took part in this, in the sense that I tried to match the books that I was reading to the prompts. I didn't actually manage to really get that involved in it in terms of doing any of the Twitter sprints or Instagram challenges or anything like that, just because of being away and then being ill. I just didn't get around to, unfortunately, so that's sad. But I have been watching some of the vlogs that people have done for that readathon and they looked really fun, and I was still glad to take part to a very low degree. So I actually managed to read 2 books for my TBR for that, and the 3rd book that I read this month also would have completed the challenge of having green on the cover. So I ticked off 3 prompts out of I think 5, so that's not too bad, I don't think. So without any further ado, I'll just actually show you the books that I read. So the first book that I finished this month was Pages & Co by Anna James. I read this to complete the prompt, which was to read a book that featured a cat. And I mean, a cat isn't a very central part of this story, but there's definitely an illustration of a cat in here at some point, and the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland appears at one point, so I'm definitely counting it as a success for that challenge. And this book was just so lovely. So if you didn't know, it's a middle grade story. It's about a young girl called Tilly who lives above a bookshop with her grandparents, and you find out that her mother disappeared when she was very young, and she's been living with her grandparents ever since, and they've been raising her. Tilly is a massive reader, and one day she starts realizing that some of her favorite characters are appearing in the shop and she's able to communicate with them, and that just leads us on to discovering this whole world of book wandering and just lovely, bookish, wholesome magic. This was just such a lovely, wholesome story. I always love books that are either about books or about people who just love to read, and this just perfectly encapsulated that and took it one step further, because you also got to see these really classic characters interacting with Tilly and the modern world. So some of the characters that Tilly meets includes Alice from Alice in Wonderland, Anne from Anne of Green Gables, and Sarah Crewe from A Little Princess. Book wandering is just such a cool concept. Who wouldn't want to fall into the pages of their favourite book? I wish this book had been around when I was a child, because I'm pretty sure it would have been an absolute favourite then, but I still loved it reading it as an adult. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars, and I'm definitely going to be checking out the other books in this series. I know that there are 2 more that are out at the moment, so I'm hopefully gonna get around to them at some point. The second book that I read this month was The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. This book met the challenge for the Bratz Readathon of reading a book with an East Asian main character, and I'm not going to talk about this book too much here because I have a full 30-minute reading vlog of my experience. I wouldn't recommend going and watching that if you haven't read the book, however, because it was very difficult to vlog without talking about spoilers. So for those of you that don't want to or can't watch it, a summary of my feelings towards this book: I absolutely loved it, and I really didn't expect to. I explained in the video that I am not a fantasy reader. I've defined myself for so many years as someone who actively almost dislikes fantasy, and I was really starting to question that, and I've definitely begun to question it even more after having read this book, because I absolutely loved it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I can't wait to carry on with the rest of the series. I just loved so many of the characters in this book, and I loved so many of the themes that R.F. Kuang explores. I don't want to say too much about the plot of the book because I didn't really know that much going in, and I actually think it was better to realise what was happening as you read it. But to sort of summarise for those of you who don't know, the main character in this book is a girl called Rin, who is a peasant girl essentially. She's a war orphan, she lives with a foster family, and she's from the poorest province in her country, which is called Nakara, and she takes this test to get into a military academy, and she wants to get into the top military academy in the country because she can't afford to go to any of the others, and this is the only free one. And she ends up doing just that. She ends up going to this academy, and the book follows from there as Rin and her classmates end up getting pulled into this war between her country Nakara and the Federation of Mugen, which is an island off the coast of Nakara. So that's a very brief summary. Obviously a lot more happens, and I would just recommend that everyone go and check this book out because I really didn't think I was gonna like it, and I did. I would say that if, like me, you don't typically read fantasy but would like to explore the genre a bit, it's a really good one to go for because the writing was very accessible. The fantasy elements were introduced very gradually. It wasn't all just like dumped on you at the start. In fact, at the very start of the book you wouldn't really know that fantasy was gonna happen in the book. You also follow Rin in the academy, and you learn a lot about the history of her country and its culture and all sorts of things like that, and the previous Poppy Wars through lessons. And I thought that that was a really good way for me personally. I don't know if that would work for everyone because I know other people would prefer not to be sort of told stuff in that way, but I liked that because it just made it very easy for me to follow. But yeah, I can't wait to carry on with the series, and I said this in my other video but I'll say it again here. If you have any recommendations for me based on the fact that I enjoyed the Poppy War, please let me know in the comments, because if it's fantasy I probably will not have read it. I have literally read no fantasy in about 5 years at least, so yes, recommendations please. And the third book that I finished in September wasn't actually on my TBR for the Bratz Readathon, but it would have completed the challenge of reading book with green on the cover, and that was The Mercies by Kieran Millwood Hargrave. This book, I swear, I can just feel that it's going to be one of my new all-time favourite books. I just loved it so much, and it just felt so nice to have picked something up with absolutely no knowledge of it. I just picked it up on a whim because it was new in at the library. The blurb mentioned witches, and although I've never read a Kieran Millwood Hargrave book before, I do actually own one of her other books, and I have met her twice at 2 Yalks. The first time was actually a very bizarre meeting because she was in front of me in the queue for, I think it was a Louise O'Neill sign-in. It was someone sign-in, and we were talking in the queue and she was telling me about how her debut book was just coming out, and then I think really shortly after that her debut novel came out, and it obviously won some prizes and there was a lot of talk about it, and I saw her picture on Twitter I think, and I was like, oh my god, that's the woman that I met at Yalk in the queue. And then I met her another time to get my book signed, but I actually still haven't read any of her books, which is awful, until this one, and I will definitely be reading more because I just loved this one so much. So it's set in the 1600s in a place called Vardø in the north of Norway, and it basically follows a real storm that happened. So at the beginning of this book, all the men go out to sea and there's this big storm, and all the men in this community get killed, and all the women are obviously left behind and have to learn to survive and fend for themselves. But because, you know, women can't possibly be allowed to survive by themselves without a man overseeing them, this man from Scotland gets called to go and be the commissioner to this community, and he picks up a wife along the way. Basically her dad basically sells her to be this man's wife, and the book then follows the story of Maren, who is one of the girls who is originally from this community. Her dad, her brother and her betrothed all were killed in this storm, and then the other perspective you get is Ursa, who is the girl who becomes the commissioner's wife. It follows Maren and Ursa's two stories separately to begin with, but then you see their stories coming together and intertwining. So the real focus of the book is this female relationship, but also in the background of this you have this impending witch trial. So that's a real key element to the story as well, and there's a big exploration of what it means to be a witch and how witchcraft accusations sort of came about, I guess. I feel like I didn't explain that very well. There's something about that book that I just found very difficult to explain, but I just loved it so much. First of all, Kieran's writing style is so beautiful. It was so poetic in places and just so evocative. From the very first chapter, when the men went out to sea, I was literally almost crying at that bit, and I thought I'm going to be in for an emotional ride throughout this book, and I definitely was. I would say it's quite a slow-paced book, and it did take me quite a while to read, but not in a sense that it was dragging and it was boring, more in a sense that I really just wanted to like savour every little bit and every little word and everything that was happening. And just the story itself was so poignant and moving and emotional, and the relationship between the two women was just so complex, and I just loved it. I would just recommend going and looking it up if you think it's something that you're interested in, and I personally think that it's going to be one that stays with me for a very long time. Absolute new favourite. So moving on to my October reading plan. So I've got 2 things on the go at the moment, and as I said, there are a few other things that I'd like to pick up during October, and also a few readathons that I'd like to take part in. I may use the books that I talk about here to meet challenges. It really just depends on how much I manage to get read before those readathons begin. So first of all, the 2 things that I'm reading at the moment, I'm actually listening to Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas on audio. I just really wanted another audiobook to listen to because I listened to Daisy Jones and the Six on audio a couple of months ago and really just loved the whole audiobook experience. I feel like it's a really easy way to consume more books because I go on a walk pretty much every day, and I have a lot of time in the house when I'm not doing anything, or when I'm cooking or cleaning or whatever, and I feel like I could be utilising that time to read. So I wanted to give another audiobook a go, and this is the one that I decided to pick up, and it's actually perfect because this is the October book for the Perfectly Queer book club, which is hosted by Lily from Lily Eleanor Reads and Molly from Mind of Molly, and that means that I'll be able to join in and watch the live show and join in with the discussion on it. So yes, I'm not very far into it, only a few chapters into it, but I'm really enjoying it so far. I love Maritza, she's my favourite so far, but yes, I've heard so many good things about this book, and I will talk about it properly in my October wrap up. And the book that I'm physically reading at the moment is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is obviously just the dust jacket because I took it off and the book is somewhere else and I cannot be bothered to go and find it. I'm about 50 pages into this at the moment. I think that this is more of a horror than like a thriller. I haven't really got to anything too horrifying yet. There have been a couple of like weird and slightly gross things that happen, and I just feel that's going to get worse. So I have read this quite slowly because I've been feeling a bit ill. I haven't really been feeling reading this for fear that something really disgusting and something that's going to make me feel even worse is going to happen. But now that I feel a bit better, I want to get through it. I need to pick up my pace with it if I'm even going to stand a chance of reading any of the other things that I'm going to mention. So as I mentioned, there are actually 3 readathons / read-alongs happening that I want to try and take part in this month. Actually 4 if you count the Perfectly Queer book club, which I'm also actually going to be reading the book for. So the first one I actually have the book for, and that is the Rebecca Along, which is being hosted by Kira from Kira Foster and Jess from Read by Jess. And the aim of this read along is basically to read Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca over the course of October, well, up to like the 23rd, when the new Rebecca movie is going to be released on Netflix. I've read this before. I read it for my first year of uni and I absolutely love this book. It's one of my favourites, not just what I read at uni, but just of life. So I'm really excited to be rereading it for the first time. I'm hoping that I can get through it quite quickly because I have read it before, and I'm just so excited for the movie as well. I've seen a stage adaptation of it before and really enjoyed it, but I've never seen any other adaptation, so I'm really hoping that I'm really going to enjoy the film. So yeah, looking forward to reading it and hearing everyone else's thoughts about it as well. So I think maybe I'll pick this one up next and like read it sort of a bit a day in the background. The next book club / readathon that I want to take part in is being hosted by the Dark Academics book club, and I will leave the links for that and everything else that I've mentioned in this video in the description. The announcement for the group books for this month recently went out, and they also announced that they're going to be hosting a 2-week-long readathon from the 17th to the 31st of October with loads of different prompts. The 2 group books, I'm definitely going to try and read one of them. I'm not sure about the other. I'm going to see how my reading goes because I'm not particularly interested in one of them over like some of the other books that are on my general October TBR, and I feel like maybe I should prioritize. But the 2 books are The Phantom of the Opera and also We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. Now, We Have Always Lived in the Castle is one that I definitely want to read, and I actually ordered it before the announcement went out, so it was just like perfect that I can fit it into my October TBR. So I'm definitely going to try and get around to that one. Phantom, I'm not so sure about. I'm gonna wait and see how my reading goes. I think you can get it for like quite cheap, so that shouldn't be too much of a problem if I decide last minute that I want to pick it up. In terms of the actual readathon prompts, as I've said before, I'm gonna think about them a little more closer to the time of the readathon, depending on what other things I've got done, what I've ticked off my October TBR already. There's also another readathon that I want to take part in literally just before this, and this is the Fall into Autumn readathon, which is being hosted by Kira from Kira Foster. She's literally a host for all 3 of these things that I've mentioned. Also hosted by Em from Little Writer M and Meg from Pride and Fiction. And this readathon is basically all about getting into the cozy autumn spirit, and it's being held from the 16th to the 18th of October, so there's actually a little bit of overlap. But I just really want to have like a cozy autumn weekend, so this readathon is the perfect excuse. And again, the prompts I'm going to decide closer to the weekend. But that being said, I thought I would just quickly talk about a few more things that I would like to try and fit into October. The first is True Story by Kate Reid Petty. I really want to read this month because I just feel like if I don't pick it up in October, it will probably wait on my shelf until next October, because it just feels like the perfect sort of thing to read at this time of year. This book basically tells one story from different perspectives and blends different genres, including horror, psychological thriller, crime, all that sort of thing. All of those genres just scream October to me. The other thing, I mean, I have already started, but I've read like 15 pages of it, and that is 6 Tudor Queens, Anne Boleyn, A King's Obsession. I've talked about this series quite a lot. It was on my TBR for September. I didn't get around to it, and I do still really want to carry on with this series. However, I'm just not sure. It's quite long, and I would rather read spooky books this month and autumnal feeling books, because that's just what I'm in the mood for. I feel like once this month is gone, then I'll be in the mood to like snuggle up with some historical fiction, so maybe this will be one for November. But if by some miracle I get round to like everything else that I want to read, then I will definitely pick this one up. So that's everything. Those were the books that I read in September and the books that I'd like to try and get round to in October. I'm planning on doing a couple of vlogs in October, so hopefully you'll be able to see how I get on with some of the readathons that I'm planning on taking part in. But other than that, that is everything for today's video. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. I hope you're all keeping safe and staying well, and I will see you again next time. Bye.